Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time Center of Pestilence, and welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss magic, mysticism, religion, the occult, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, I want to do something a little different. It was almost a year ago when I made a video called How to Begin Your Path. And through that time, since then, I've made a lot of videos on different subjects, different practices, etc. But one thing that I've never covered is how do you take it to the next level? So let's say you've been practicing, you've been studying for quite some time, and you're getting into that point where you're like, okay, I get the basics, I sort of know what I'm doing, but you don't know where to go next. Essentially, you're struggling at becoming advanced. The term advanced in the occult is a really interesting one because it's a hard thing to define. I actually did a podcast episode on what makes a person advanced quite some time back. I'll link that below. But this really got me thinking, what do we do next? What comes next? And I actually recently read a book on this topic called The Witch's Path by Thorne Mooney, which very good book that sort of addresses this subject. But I wanted to give my spin on it and my advice on it because trust me, I've made some mistakes in my experience as a practitioner, and I have in many times hit these ruts and these walls. Online, we sort of like to think of spirituality as a progress that always goes up and never address the fact that there are times where you will have setbacks. There are times where you'll be stagnant, and that stuff needs to be talked about so that we can break through that. And so I'm here to admit it. I've made mistakes. I'm not a perfect practitioner, but no one is. It's a spiritual journey for a reason, not a spiritual destination. So my first big thing is to make sure all three limbs of a good occult practice are there. So I sort of have come up with a model for how I think a successful occult practice needs to operate. And that's with three branches. This doesn't matter if you're a mystic, a witch, an occultist, whatever label you like to call yourself. And that would be first, study and research. This is going to lectures, going to discussion groups, reading books, watching videos, listening to podcasts, taking in that information, looking at the theology, looking at the metaphysics, and learning through being told from the people that have come before us. The second limb is praxis. That is doing the thing. If you want to sit around and just read occult manuscripts and just learn, that's totally fine. That's basically what being a scholar is. The idea of the armchair magician is often used in a derogatory way because, of course, if you want to be an occultist, you want to be a magician, you need to apply the thing. But if you are someone who's just interested in it from a curiosity perspective, that's valid. I just would call that scholarship more so than being an occultist or being a practitioner. But that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me on that. But you do need to study at some point. But that study needs to become practice. That will be your daily rituals. That will be doing rituals once a month on the full moon. That will be praying. That'll be doing whatever it is that your practice mandates. Doing that regularly and consistently. Not everyone is going to want to do magic all the time. That's completely legitimate, but you still need to practice. Like, don't allow it to go a month or two without practicing if you can. Obviously, life gets in the way sometimes, but trying to maintain a steady and consistent practice will really help. The third limb is the one that is not discussed as much, and I think we should talk about more, and that is contemplation. When you have a spiritual experience, typically it's really hard to break down and process. I find that spiritual experiences tend to be very symbolic, very much esoteric on the literal sense, and processing them takes a long time. So you need to make sure you cut out some time to process what you've gone through, to sit and contemplate and think about it, and when you consume material, like educational material, to think about, does this make sense to me? Am I just agreeing with this because I think it's what an occultist is supposed to do, or do I believe this because it aligns with my personal experiences? So making sure you can contemplate and think about things is really important. My second tip has to do with keeping a magical record. There's a bunch of terms for this: the magical record, the book of shadows, the grimoire, the journal, whatever you want to call it. Every tradition has sort of a term for a notebook where you write down what you're doing and sometimes what you're learning. But if you want to make this really work for you, I suggest leaving space for your results and your observations. So you write down the ritual you're doing. If you're someone who writes down correspondences, I personally don't do stuff like that. I use my magical record very strictly as like my personal practice and like what I'm doing. I always leave space for my results, for if I have dreams, if I do divination afterwards, because I find it's really helpful to do a tarot reading after you do a ritual to like be like, what will this bring me? What does this mean? Stuff like that. And write that down. And I will basically put on the left side of my notebook what I'm doing and on the right side all my results. And sometimes even weeks later, I'll see like a sign. Like let's say I did a Hecate ritual and then 2 weeks later, I see a Hecate sign. I would write that on that page. I think that that can really take it to the next level. My third tip is to read older things. So a lot of modern occult material is very beginner oriented. This is because a lot of people are always coming into the practice. As well, reading beginner books when you're more experienced, there's no shame in that. I read beginner books still. There's a lot of subjects in the occult that I'm not versed on. And so I will turn to beginner books because, you know, it gives me context on an area that I'm not aware of. And I find even as a Thelemite, sometimes I'll read a beginner Thelema book just to, you know, see new perspectives. I feel like there's always something you can learn from a book, unless the book's absolutely terrible, but most occult books are not absolutely terrible. But eventually you're going to need to step beyond that and read older books. A lot of these modern books are essentially pulling from the same sources and the same thinkers if you look far enough back. Right? Like when it comes to practical occultism, eventually you're gonna want to read Crowley. You're gonna want to. Like the idea of will, that's something that's so ingrained in modern Western occultism that eventually you're gonna want to read Crowley. Eventually you're gonna want to read the 3 books of occult philosophy by Agrippa, because that's been one of the most revolutionary occult books, and a lot of occult ideas are from that text. Eventually, you're going to have to suck it up and read the source books. I like the term source books for them. There's one series Llewellyn does, they call like the source books, where they reprint older stuff. I like that term because this is where a lot of the sourcing comes from, and then modern books are building upon the source books because our traditions are built upon what has come before. It's always expanding, it's always growing. It's a living tradition that's, you know, growing based off those sources. So you're gonna need to read them. I know that they can be hard. Certain sections can be problematic if you're someone who gets into that. You know, like, you just kind of have to do it at some point. There's no real way around it if you want to go super deep. Eventually, you're gonna have to read an old book. Sorry. I'm actually not sorry about that. Just read the book. It's not that bad. It's not gonna hurt you. The book is not gonna kill your family. That's what the TikTokers claim Moldavite does, okay? So if we think about it, isn't Moldavite more of a hazard to your life than old books? My next tip is to start making your own supplies. So to save money, a lot of people at the beginning make their own supplies, but I find that people don't make everything they use because sometimes making things can actually not really save you much money. Typically when you make things, there's a bigger upfront cost, but you end up saving in the long run. But beyond the monetary thing, making your own materials can really, really help. Because when you make your own materials, you can make sure all the correspondences are in there and you can understand what you're working with at a deeper level. If you're buying incense sticks, you're probably not going to be thinking about what resins are in here, what is everything building into it. Or if you're buying oils, you know, when you make your own oils, you can pick the base based on correspondences. If you're making a solar oil, you could opt for sunflower oil instead of olive oil as your base, and you can pick every single herb that's in there. And in terms of making like ritual tools like floor mats, if you're someone who does ceremonial magic, a lot of people make these big floor mats with the symbols on them so that they don't have to draw it on the floor every time. You know, when you make that yourself, you have a lot more customization and options, and you can really think about every single factor that's being put into it on a much deeper level. So when you are becoming more advanced, make more of your stuff, because there's a lot that you can learn about correspondence by making things. And when you make your own things, if you're making oils, you could make the oils, let's say it's a solar oil, on a Sunday, so that it is corresponding on an even deeper level. So it gives you a lot more power to customize and make sure that every single thing that's going into your ritualistic microcosm is what you want. My next tip is about language. So when you're getting into ceremonial magic, specifically older traditions, eventually you're going to run into some rituals that have some sections that are not in English. If you're a Thelemite like me, you're going to have to look at Greek and Kabbalah, which is in Hebrew. So with Kabbalah, you really do need to learn a little bit of Hebrew to truly understand Kabbalah. Especially like you can look at the Tree of Life and you can just remember what those words translate to, but eventually you're really going to want to learn the Hebrew alphabet. So that would be something that you need to do. However, you do not need to actually attain fluency in any language that you're studying. And if you want to do that, that's great, but it's not generally necessary. Typically, like with Greek, because I don't actually speak Greek, I will, when I get presented a ritual, like say the Star Ruby, that's a Thelemic ritual that has some Greek in it, I will make sure that I translate and make sure the translations are correct of everything that's in there, so I know what I'm actually saying. A lot of the times, things that are in other languages are in other languages as a point of emphasis. And so they are in other languages for a reason. It's not like the stereotypical horror movie that just like randomly puts things in Latin for some reason. Like there's typically a reason for it, and you're gonna wanna know what you're saying. But it's typically not necessary to actually attain fluency. You just need to know the alphabet, some basic understandings, like some very, very basic information, and what you're actually saying so that you can make sure it's something you actually want to say. My next tip is something that's a little personal to me and something that I've wrestled with a lot, and that would be guilt. When we talk about religious guilt, we typically think of Catholicism, right? Like the Catholic who sinned and they feel this immense guilt and that they've failed as a person, right? But religious guilt is something that we all can feel. Personally, I get it around sometimes daily practices. So you guys know I'm a big believer in daily practices. I have videos on it. I think that a daily practice is essential to becoming a more successful, more advanced practitioner. That regularity makes a huge, huge difference. I do things like Resh and LBRPs every single day. And occasionally, things get in the way, especially with Resh. I find this happens more with me with Resh than anything else I do, because Resh you have to do multiple times a day. I'll be like running errands and I'll forget, say, the noon Resh. And I'll feel bad about it. Like I will be like, God damn it, I'm a bad Thelemite. But that doesn't help anyone. With these rituals, if you miss one, it's not life or death. Just either do it when you remember or do the next one and just get back on track. The guilt, I find, prevents me from even getting back on my feet, right? Like if I miss a Resh, I'll be like, well, what's the point of doing the rest of Resh today? I've already messed it up. And you just get into this really negative spiral really fast, and it's not helpful. Even for bigger things, like let's say you miss a full moon ritual because you're sick. Don't beat yourself up over it. It doesn't even help you get back on track. Focus on getting back on track and release the guilt. Guilt is holding you back. Guilt is not helping you. Throw it away, put it in the trash. My next tip is to not forget your fundamentals. There are some fundamental things that people learn early on. That would be visualization, breath work, meditation, sigils. These very simple things that beginners, get told early on. Don't lose track of them. I find when people become more advanced, they get really into, I don't know if it's like chasing the flashy rituals, chasing the exciting rituals. There are multiple ways you could phrase it. But let's say they get really, really into Enochian or Goetia and they want to do these huge ceremonial rituals. They want to do these big initiations, all this stuff. But in that process, they forget where all this begins, the beginner stuff, the breath, the sigil, the meditation. You could even spend your entire spiritual career studying breath and meditation, and you would still have more to learn. These fundamentals are fundamentals because they're building blocks. They're the foundation in which the house is built upon. So you should not forget them, and you should still be reading about them. Keep doing your meditation. Keep reading about the complexity of what breath can do, because it's amazing how much literally the different ways you can breathe can make a difference. So don't forget where the basics are. Don't lose sight of them. They are fundamentals, not beginner things. My next is to read books that are not occult. When you're trying to take the occult to the next level, reading exclusively occult genre books can actually hold you back a little bit. I love occult literature. I read occult books all the time. I feel like I constantly have one coming in my house. But there are other things that can actually really help your practice. Things like if you're someone who's into herbal magic or like plant stuff or the mysteries of plant spirits or something, read books on botany, on gardening. Those will really, really help you. If you're someone who's very tied to specific tradition, let's say you're a Christian mystic or a Kabbalist or something, read theology. Learning just straight religious information can really, really help. As well, in general, philosophy is really valuable. Understanding the philosophic meaning of what you're doing can really help you find direction. As a Thelemite, I think the Thelemic philosophy is really, really important to my life and my practice. Don't avoid something just because it's not strictly occult. You'd be surprised how much adjacent genres can really, really help you find new ideas, new direction, and new inspiration. My next bit of advice is something that people will probably feel pretty strongly about. Some people may really disagree with me on this, and that would be have a willingness to change directions. So when you start in spirituality, you're going to want to have a direction, a path, a way forward. And for a lot of people, that becomes traditions. Let's say you're really into Italian folk magic, you're really into Thelema, you're really into Hermeticism, you're really into Gnosticism. You can keep going on. But at some point, you may change directions. Your spiritual practice could look really different. I know what I first started practicing is not what I practice today. And you need to be okay with that. I think sometimes we're so married to specific labels and specific tracks because there is a comfort in practicing a tradition, right? Like, especially if it's one that has like a degree structure, you know, that's a path. It's a solution. It gives you, you know, your future, right? But sometimes spirituality is not that clean. Sometimes we need to remember that spirituality is a journey. That means moving from one place to another. You may end up changing paradigms, traditions, religions. I know so many people who got into witchcraft to just be a secular witch and then ended up a full-blown pagan, sometimes even just a devotional polytheist who doesn't do witchcraft like 5 years later. Your path is going to change, and you need to be okay with that and not let this fixation on having a spiritual identity, because I think that's really what it is. People want an identity, a label, a thing that gives them that comfort. Sometimes you need to release that, and sometimes you may change traditions, and that's okay. My final tip is probably the most important thing that I say in this entire video, and that would be remember why you're doing this. Are you doing magic just to do rituals, or are you doing it for something higher? Remember the great work. Remember your true will. Remember what that driving force is for why you're doing this. Don't just do rituals because you want to do rituals, right? Do them because they are leading to something. Think about your goals. Think about your aims. Think about what this all means for you and follow that. That direction, that purpose is really important. And for me as a Thelemite, obviously that means true will. I always come back to the importance of my true will and what that might be and following that. That comes first, and that core purpose is how I know what I'm going to even do. That's what drives me, what guides me, what gives me the direction. So always do your rituals for that deeper thing, not just because you want to do rituals. So that's pretty much what I want to say on this topic. Like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you subscribe for 93 days, you will meet your holy guardian angel. If you want to get more content, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram. I host the podcast Magnolias and Magic, which is a commentary podcast. I also do Twitch streams twice a week, Monday and Wednesday, with another YouTuber, Warrior Witch Nike. If you want more of my content even beyond that, I do have a Patreon. I give an extra video every single month. Most of them are like Occult 101 styles, allegedly. I also do ritual guides every month where I write up little rituals and prayers and all this stuff. And as well, if you're high enough tier, you can poke my brain once a month. So thank you for watching and have a nice day.